Thank you, Jeff, for that kind welcome. And thank you all. And let me join Jeff in welcoming you to our city. I am a San Francisco resident, and I work over in Oakland, so I get both sides of the urban area here. I will do my best to cover this small topic called the state of climate. We have a lot of information about climate right now, and I'm not going to try pretending to give you a long list of all of the climate changes and information we have, but to orient you to what we have and where we are today with it. Jeff mentioned the National Climate Assessment. This recent National Climate Assessment was just released, and there's a number of aspects to it. We have sectoral publications that really focus on things like coasts and ocean. We have regional so that people can understand, what is happening in the regions and what are the impacts. I think a couple of the things that are key about this new National Climate Assessment, I think this is the fourth one we've tried, is it isn't just about information, but it's also about of what's happening with the climate, but what are the impacts of that climate change are. So we talk about increasing temperatures and average temperatures. Well, in the Southwest and California, it's not just about the average, it's about the fact that in these hot cities, the lows are higher. So that we're not just talking about addressing air conditioning overall, we're talking about the fact that homeless and vulnerable populations, elderly, children, that used to be able to cool down at night can no longer do that. We're talking about power grid issues that we have to keep AC on at night. So these are real changes in how we're viewing this. I was talking to an emergency manager in San Diego 2 weeks ago, and they're dealing with flooding. Well, San Diego, there's less rain, right? So flooding shouldn't be a problem. The challenge is how it's happening. So there are less frequent, but more intense and shorter storms. The way that they deal with flooding is channels often down there. Those channels can't handle that. So the impacts of the flooding, even while the precipitation are going down, is increasing. And it's not just about the damage to the community around it, it's about beach closures, which is a huge economic driver because all of that trash and dirt goes straight to the beaches. So it's a really challenging thing. People think less rain, less flooding. So the climate assessment really is starting to lay out those challenges on a region basis. So there are also other impacts. This is the US disaster losses. You see spikes in trends. 2013, the last year we have full data for, was only $12.8 billion nationwide. That's way down from the average of 29.4 from 2000 to 2012. But there's some interesting trends even in 2013. So not a lot of tornadoes, but almost $10 billion in damage from thunderstorms. Something you don't think about a lot. We have in Colorado within 3 months record wildfires and record flooding. So there are definitely damages that are happening every year. And we're all paying for them. And 2013 is just the beginning of what we're seeing in California. The drought impacts that we'll probably see more and more this year and what some of the damages are. So I am going to focus on the coast. That is my expertise. That's where I get to play. And it's not unimportant. It's where most of our population is. It's where most of our infrastructure is. And it's where a lot of the vulnerability comes together. So we have a systems approach to the coast. We have the lifelines, the transportation, the energy, the water, the sewage systems. These impact other parts of the country. Ports are a lifeline to a large part of the country. And like everywhere else, we have a lot of social vulnerability and unevenness. And then, of course, because we built along the coast, we've lost a lot of the natural coastal wetlands. These are wetlands that provide a lot of services for water quality and protection to our communities. We're trying in coastal adaptation to integrate these things. There's a great project here in the Bay Area, adapting to rising tides. And what they've done with the airport was part of this Oakland airport. For any of you who have flown into the airports on the way here, you know that they're very close to the water. And Oakland was like, okay, we have this information, we can deal with it. In the regional approach, they realized that the rail system that they're relying on, the power system that they rely on, the highway they rely on, all vulnerable to sea level rise. And the community next door to it, I think we all know that generally speaking, it's poor communities next to airports, are also very vulnerable. And the wetlands that are helping protect erosion around that are also very vulnerable. So they've really done a job in engaging the entire area around all of the systems. The challenge will be, even as they come up with an adaptation plan, there's no one single funding source to address all this. So they'll need to have the railroad get funding, they'll need to have the highway get funding, they'll need to have the energy system get funding to really be able to adapt to that. So we have some challenges ahead, not just about how we deal with it, but how we finance it. So one of the other things we're doing, I think, I was talking to some people last night, is there is so much data and information out there. I think we all are a little overwhelmed with it. So how do we get from data to actionable information, I believe was the term. And there's a lot more coming out. The federal government is trying to do a better job, and I would encourage you all to hold us to that and demand more from us on actionable data. We have everything from the drought monitor to seasonal climate outlooks that tell you what's going on in the next 3 months and some of the impacts to it. We have the State of the Climate report that we release every year so you can see what's happened. We're encouraging the funding through our scientists and universities that we give money to create networks of users, local, state, private sector, to develop research proposals that answer your questions and give you information. There's a great example with the water districts here, and the research done around snowpacks and the changing snowpacks and what that will do to our water supply here in the country, in the state. So we're trying to do also more applied research in science. And lastly, at least for now, is the Digital Coast Partnership. As members of ULI, you are all actually a partner in this. It's a partnership between NOAA, ULI, the American Planning Association, the National Association of County Executives, the Nature Conservancy, and many others. And it really is about just not providing data, but tools, case studies, training to address issues that you all are dealing with. And as a partner, you help drive what we do. This is an example of the sea level rise viewer, which we have done around the country, and is serving as a baseline for a lot of the vulnerability assessments. I don't need to tell you, I think we all are talking about this, is that we live in a built environment. We have urbanized largely here, and we've done it in a way often that is about building around nature and not building with nature. What we do now have is an opportunity to build with nature and learn lessons from people like the Dutch, who have done such a great job with that. But the Dutch system is not ours, neither private sector nor government, so we will have to come up with our own solutions to that. So we have gray-green infrastructure. I know we have a panel, I believe, tomorrow on this. And this is something new for, I think, private sector planners and even government, and changing how we view green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, wetlands, as part of our defense against the hazards and changes, especially sea level rise, and understanding the multi-benefits. So wetlands help us with the water quality issues we're facing. It helps us with tourism, great birding, and birding is a huge tourist draw. And it also helps us with wave and flood attenuation. As we've seen in the Gulf, as wetlands go down, the waves have greater impact on the communities right next to them. And even in California, we have 1 in 9 wetlands historically left. I think it's been so long since we've changed some of the wetlands, but we also have the largest wetland restoration project on the West Coast in the Bay. So how can we use that to help plan for sea level rise? We're changing culturally. I mean, the government's trying. We have this, I apologize for this acronym, the systems approach to geomorphic engineering. It's an Army Corps acronym, but it's called SAGE, and the idea is to get the gray and green together. So it's actually rather clever. But it's bringing the Army Corps and actually NGOs like TNC together to help see if we can change some of the traditional government practices of encouraging and financing just a built flood wall, seawall solution to our answers. And that a lot of people you don't expect are starting to think about it this way. So going back to that emergency manager in San Diego, he was talking about the fact that he doesn't think that the planners in the area can get the money to change the culverts. So what he's looking to do is figure out how to get rid of some of the paved environment in other areas so that the water has a chance to filter into the ground. But then there's the challenge of you also need to plant things to make sure that the mud just doesn't flow into the culverts. And they're in a drought situation, so they need drought-tolerant plants. And so it becomes a real systems approach. What's really interesting, and I'll sort of transition to where I started, is that this emergency manager is planning for the next hazard mitigation plan update. That's a 5-year plan. He's not talking about 10 and 20 years that he's seeing these impacts. He's talking about seeing them today. This isn't information that we're dealing with of, this is gonna be what the state is in 20 years. It's what we're starting to see today. And I think if there's one message is that we're starting to have those challenges. We often think of climate change in one of 2 ways. We think of it as 50-year planning horizons, or we think of it in extremes. There is a bigger storm, there's gonna be a hurricane, there's gonna be a tornado. Really what we're seeing is new normals every day. So when we talk about climate change, we can't talk about it as a future state anymore. We have to talk about it as a new normal to plan for and invest in today. Thank you. So I've been told I have time for questions. And there are 2 mics.
Yes. That was great. Thank you very much. I couldn't help but be struck. I mean, it was a great kickoff that Lynn gave us as far as an overview. But when you were giving the example of Oakland, we have all of these specialty areas. We have specialty areas that deal in transport, specialty areas that deal in the grid. And when we're talking about coming up with a new solution, I mean, the thought that was going through my head is, the last thing we need is a super discipline on top of it. Everybody needs to deal with. But it's almost as if each of the specialty areas that we are comfortable with needs to add an appendage on that is the link up with the common thread being dealing with this issue relative to effective climate change, hurt, whatever it is, but recognizing that all of their solutions and all of their future state needs to adapt to this, as you point out, kind of new, I don't want to say new normal because that gets a trite phrase, but this new circumstance that is an element of change that we have to deal with. Was that your point of kind of raising that it's actually not some global, everybody needs to have a United States Department of Resiliency, but it's more along the lines of everybody needs to bring the capability into their practice?
I think you make a really good point. I think it really is about bringing these capabilities and this information for these new circumstances into what we have today. Trying to separate it out creates it as something that becomes an overlay and not integrated into our everyday thinking. I know, FEMA's trying to encourage when people do hazard mitigation plan updates, how do they bring in some of the future conditions for improving their community ratings. I know in California, they're trying to put criteria for general plans when they update that to include potential future impacts from climate change, whether it be wildfire, drought, sea level rise, into the existing planning. So it really is integrated rather than this separate thing that people see as, you know, something they don't have to deal with every day. They create the plan, they check the box, and it becomes, when you don't have money, something on that side. Yes?
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the modeling that you're doing and the climate modeling you're doing? I know we have a visiting fellow at ULI in Europe who has written a paper about how to use more locally adapted climate models to assess risk going forward for real estate. And so the question in my mind is, can you talk about how we're taking these large-scale global climate models and now bringing them down to more and more usable levels, such as San Francisco or different neighborhoods within San Francisco? What's the path, and when can we really start to rely on these kinds of models?
Good question, and it's actually, I'll admit, at the edge of my expertise. I'm not the modeling side of NOAA, and there's some big global models and some really big thinkers on it. I think what we are seeing is, now that we see the trends and the understanding, is this downscaling effort. And we're doing it often in partnerships with universities who are based in the regions and know more about it. And I think, you know, as we get better, just like we have with weather forecasting, which after all is a model, we will see more of that. We're not there yet. And I think, you know, as much as you downscale, we get better resolution, but that doesn't change the underlying data and uncertainty in that model, no matter how fine scale we get. Every year we get more data to help us with that, and every year we get better at downscaling. So I think we're headed that way so that cities and towns and regions can really plan this. I think it will be a while before we get it to a 72-hour weather forecast. But, you know, we've come a long way even in the last decade on that. So I imagine it's going to continue pretty quickly.